Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hobby Homestead. It is cold right now, like minus 17 Celsius. I was feeling really gloomy today. You know, it was recently Blue Monday and friggin' dark mornings. I'm really tired of them. I just want it to be bright at 6 a.m. again. And I came out to the chickens and it definitely helped me to get outside. Hey ladies, do you want some mealworms? Some sunflower seeds. The snow has blown right in where they get out of their coop into the run. They don't like that. After at least 2 months of no eggs, because the days were dark, the nights were long, the chickens just don't lay this time of year, we got our first egg of the year. I'm gonna put it in my pocket and hope to not make a pocket omelet. Let's get inside. I wanna talk to you about edible perennials for the garden, things you can order now or go look for at garden centers in the spring so that you can have food for years to come with minimal effort. Oh my God, it's so cold. Okay, we're back inside now where it is so much more reasonable. It's really cold and windy out there today. So it's no secret that I love my annual vegetables, but they can be so much work, especially the ones that I have to start from seed every January or February or even into March and then baby them until they can go outside. It's a lot of work. And I find that the plants that feed my family the most reliably with as little hands-on work as possible are my edible perennials. So this video is about my top 10 favorite edible perennials. These are plants that mostly take care of themselves and just get better with age. So of the plants that I'm talking about today, some of them are native, some aren't. Some are a wild plant that I just grow in a cultivated way, and some are plants that have been cultivated over years so that they are perennial and produce abundantly. Now, generally speaking, the wild plants will yield a little bit less, but they'll be more hands-off, and the cultivated plants will yield more, but I'll have to put more effort into growing them. With these plants, either the wild or the cultivated, the native or the non-native, we're playing the long game. With perennials, it's all about being patient. You sow the seeds and then you apply patience and you apply sometimes years, and then you get your abundant yields. And with that in mind, let's kick it off. My first top favorite perennial edible is asparagus. Asparagus is one that I have always had in my life. My parents always grew it even before I was old enough to have my own garden. And then it's one of the first perennials I planted when I moved out on my own. And we've been here for 4 years now, and my asparagus patch is 2 years old, going into its 3rd year this year. And it is already showing us its abundance. Now, with asparagus, if you start it from seed or you plant little seedlings, you should wait at least 3 years before harvesting. That can feel like forever. But if you start with crowns, that can speed things up. And then after about 2 years, you can start harvesting a little bit. And then in year 3 and beyond, you should get a lot more. With asparagus, there's this precious harvest window that becomes a really nice seasonal routine. As with all wild foods, it's not something that you just harvest for an entire growing season. There's a harvest window that you have to get those within. And for me, it's May and June. If you live in a warmer climate, it'll be earlier. And even though my crowns are they're going into their 3rd year, last year we had enough asparagus to feed ourselves all that we wanted to eat fresh. And I even had some extra to give to my mom because she had to leave her old asparagus patch behind when she moved. And this year, I fully anticipate we will have enough asparagus to feed our family of 4 all that we want to eat fresh, to share some with neighbors, and also to do some pickling because I love a good pickled asparagus. Now, for reference, we have a 20-foot row of asparagus planted. And you can expand that patch through root divisions. So every 4 or so years, you can dig up the crowns, and as long as they look healthy and like they're expanding, you can divide them with a sharp tool and then plant those in separate spaces. You can also, if you have pretty much any variety of asparagus, it will produce seeds, and so it will sow itself. I do grow a sterile variety. It's a male-only hybrid. It's called Guelph Millennium. And I do that for 2 reasons. One, it's longevity. So asparagus is a perennial that's fairly long-lived, but they do only live for like 15 to 20 years typically. And then you just have to keep expanding your patch. But the Guelph Millennium, there have been some field trials done on this patch that was started in 1990. And as of 2025, they said that it had not slowed down in its productivity. So that's 25 years. And that's really valuable to me. I don't want to have to find more square footage in the ground to keep growing newer beds of asparagus. I want that to feed me for as long as I'm here. And the other reason is the male-only varieties, they don't expend any energy into seed production, so you get larger, thicker spears, more spears from the plants, because they're really just focusing on that vegetative growth. That's why I grow Guelph Millennium, and also I live in Guelph, and this is the town where that variety was first cultivated, and so of course I'm going to grow that variety. Okay, number 2 in my list, my top 10 favorite edible perennials, is actually a giant category of plants. I'm going to cheat a lot in this list because I love my edible perennials, and I just can't make myself break that down into just 10 species of plant. So number 2 is actually berry bushes and shrubs. I know it's a massive category, but that's probably a valuable thing because you can do research to look up the berry bushes and shrubs that do best where you live. But what I love about berry bushes and shrubs is that they are quicker to establish than something like, say, a fruit tree. So you can generally get fruit off of them sooner after planting. And they also don't take up a ton of space. And even if it's one that will grow really like wild and gangly, you can generally keep it cut back. So even in a smaller backyard garden or front yard garden, you can fit things like berry bushes and shrubs. One of my favorites for my area is haskaps. And it's one of my favorites because I would love to be able to grow blueberries. Blueberries are high in antioxidants. They're a pretty high value item at the grocery store. And I like to grow things at home that are high value at the grocery store. But blueberries just don't grow here where I live. I live in a part of Ontario with very calcareous soils. We have lots of calcium, and that gives us very high pH. And blueberries really like lower pH. They like more acidic soil. And it is next to impossible to permanently change the pH of your soil to make it more acidic. I have tried. And I can grow blueberries in pots, but they still struggle because then they're above ground and then they get winter kill. And it's very dramatic and difficult to grow blueberries for me. And so I grow haskaps instead. And I find haskaps are a slightly more tart version of a blueberry, more like wild blueberries, but they are a bush that grows to about 4 feet wide, so manageable for most garden spaces, even small gardens. And they're delicious. They're native to where I live, but they're not just native here. They are native pretty much around the globe along this latitude. So anywhere in this sort of temperate boreal forest type environment where we get our cold winters and then we get our warm summers, that's where haskaps tend to be native to, so they do well here. The only trick with haskaps is that they do require a pollinizer. That just means that you need another haskap of a different cultivar or variety to pollinate and get a good yield on them. However, you can get away with then 2 haskap bushes, both which produce berries. They can pollinate each other, and then you're still only talking about like 8 square feet of space dedicated to haskaps. The other downside of haskaps, if you can call it a downside, is that they take a little longer than other berry bushes to really start producing in earnest. About 5 to 7 years to start getting a lot of berries on them, which I know is one of my big pros about berry bushes and shrubs, as opposed to things like fruit trees, is like the fast turnaround on getting a harvest. Haskaps are maybe one of the exceptions to that, but worth it because they're delicious. Other ones that are maybe faster to grow include currants, and currants also grow really well in shady areas. Not like deep shade, but part shade, like on a forest edge type environment. Currants come in all different colors and flavors, and so you can really shop around and find one you like. Gooseberries are another one that I love. I have an eastern prickly gooseberry, which is a native variety, which is a bit more tart and also very prickly. But then there's also cultivated varieties that are wonderful. I have black velvet gooseberry and it's delicious. So currants and gooseberries and haskaps, they don't get huge. They're fairly easy to keep in line. Some that get a little bit bigger include elderberries, choke cherries, choke berries, also called aronia berries. They're like, they're really shrubs. They can get, 8 feet tall maybe. I should look this up. But they also produce really unique berries. They're not the kind where you just walk by and pick them raw, generally. Choke cherries are very astringent, and I grew up eating them, just foraging them in our farmland where we lived, and they make your mouth like pucker up, but not like a sour does. It's just an astringent feeling in your mouth, and it sounds like it wouldn't be desirable, but it's really great. They're really fun to eat, and the taste is awesome. And you can make preserves out of chokecherries as well. It's a really, really resilient plant. This like chokecherries live all over the place and in all conditions, all soil types. Choke berries or aronia berries are similar, although I have not actually eaten any. I have them planted, but they haven't started to produce yet. And then elderberries are one that you do not eat raw, but they make excellent preserves, and you can make syrups out of them. And the great thing about elderberries is that they produce elder flowers, which I think are even more culinarily desirable than the berries. I make cider and syrups out of the elder flowers that are to die for. Now there's one more that I want to highlight here, and that is the serviceberry. For me, my serviceberry is a tree, but that's, I think, less common. Usually serviceberries come in a shrub, lots of little stems or trunks, whereas mine is a single trunked tree. But typically they're a little smaller. Serviceberries are generally fabulous, but I have learned recently that there is a lot of plant to plant variation, and that's probably because they're like subspecies variations. Some of them have less desirable fruit, but most serviceberries that I've tried have been juicy, plump, very blueberry-like, and just totally awesome. My serviceberry tree goes through big bumper crop years where it will produce gallons of fruit, and then years where it doesn't produce much at all. But in its good years, there's enough for all the neighborhood birds and enough for us. And so serviceberries are a great native shrub or tree that you can try in your yard. Number 3 are more berries. I think I really did cheat with this, but this is a category of berries that grow on canes. Now we have blackcap raspberries, which are a native variety, and they taste amazing, but they tend to be very, very prickly and very seedy. So we have a small patch of the native wild blackcap raspberries, but then I also have cultivated raspberries. Now, if you're choosing a raspberry variety for your space, consider that there are generally 2 categories. There is the summer bearing and then there's the fall bearing, and you have to treat these differently in how you prune them. I would say fall bearing is the easiest. So if you're just getting into raspberries and you don't think you want to have to do a lot of research into pruning and caring for your raspberries, maybe try the fall bearing. With fall bearing, you get a big harvest in where I live, August, September, and October. And then the summer bearing, you get still a pretty good harvest, but less intense. And it starts in early July and goes all the way through until September or October. And the main difference here in the 2 varieties for me is in how you prune them. So with summer bearing, the fruit appears on last year's new growth. Those were the prima canes. And then when they produce flowers and berries, they become floricanes. And you have to cut back the floricanes after they've finished producing their berries. So you have to keep track of what cane is what. And if you cut back your prima canes before they have actually produced flowers and berries, then you are decreasing your yield considerably. Now, I've finally wrapped my head around raspberry pruning, but my problem is the rabbits don't care about my raspberries being prima canes or floricanes, and they get in there and they nibble back all of the canes. So I've struggled to get good yield on my summer bearing raspberries unless I take the time and effort to wrap my entire 25-foot row of raspberries with wire fencing, which to me is just too much work. The fall bearing, you're supposed to cut those back after the growing season because all the berries really grow on the new wood, the new canes that grow that year, because they have more of the growing season to mature and then put on fruit for fall. And so it doesn't matter if the rabbits get in there and chew the canes back because they're just helping me. So I think if I were to plant raspberries again, currently I have both summer bearing and fall bearing. If I were to do it again, I would just do fall bearing and let all my other berry varieties fill in the gaps for me in earlier spring and earlier summer. Now, I would be remiss to talk about canes without mentioning blackberries. We used to grow blackberries at my old place, and my family we didn't love them. We didn't fall in love with them. And so I never made space for them in this garden. But a lot of people love blackberries. And I do grow something called a boysenberry, which is a cross between blackberries, raspberries, loganberries, and dewberries. And to me, it tastes quite blackberry-ish. It just has a little bit more flavor. So I grow that instead. But blackberries are one that is very easy to grow. It just takes up a lot of space and can get quite unruly. So be prepared for that if you're going to grow blackberries. Next on the list is another berry. I promise that this list is not just berries. This is the last berry that I'm going to mention, I think. And this is strawberries. Strawberries are different from berry bushes and shrubs, and they're different from caned berries. This is an herbaceous perennial, so the plant itself will die back over the winter, just leaving the root under the ground. And they're very different in terms of how you care for them. Strawberries are also a shorter-lived perennial, so they die off after 4 or 5 years, or at very least the yield decreases considerably after 4 or 5 years. Luckily, strawberries reproduce readily. They're always sending out little runners, and so you can harvest those runners, plant them, and then just keep your patch going so that it functions like a perennial. It's just a little bit more work in that regard. I've grown strawberries in pots, in those vertical planters where there's little pockets coming around this tower. And I've also grown them in a raised bed. And I'm changing up how I will be growing strawberries. My design going into probably the fall of 2026 will be to put in 3 new beds that are almost in-ground beds, just sort of framed in to keep them clean and tidy. And I'm going to be focusing on airflow. Problem in my raised bed is that when the soil level went down over the years, the strawberry plants went down, and then there were sides blocking the airflow. And then, of course, pest protection, predator protection is a huge priority for anyone wanting to grow strawberries, because either the birds will get them, or the slugs will get them, or the chipmunks and squirrels will get them, rabbits will get them. Everybody loves strawberries as much as you do. And so we had a cage on our raised bed where we grew strawberries the past 3 years, and it worked great to keep all pests out. No pests got my strawberries, but we will be doing some sort of actual sturdy wire mesh protection over the strawberries in the new beds as well. And then the third thing I'm really focusing on with the new design is rotation. You really should be able to save your runners and move them on to a succession of beds so that you always have strawberry plants in their prime each year. Now, with strawberries, like with raspberries, there are 2 main categories. There's some other kinds of strawberries too, but like main categories would be day neutral or June bearing. And day neutral, they sort of produce multiple little harvests throughout the whole growing season. You can get a harvest of strawberries for a lot longer in the season. And then the June bearing, in around June, they get a big flush of big berries. And I've planted both varieties in the past. I've grown both kinds, and moving forward, I will stick to June bearing. You can actually just mow down all the foliage at the end of the growing season with June bearing, and that helps reduce fungal pressure because you're getting rid of all those leaves that were there that might have had fungal spores on them. And then they grow back in the spring, do a nice showing of fruit in June, and then you let the foliage finish photosynthesizing and start to die back, and then you can mow it down again. Whereas with summer bearing, you can't just mow that down because they're producing fruit right up until sometimes August, even September. So keep that in mind if you're going to grow strawberries. Make a decision. Do you want June bearing to get a big harvest of bigger berries all at once? Or would you like to stretch that harvest out? And it totally depends on what else you have growing in your garden. Do you have other kinds of berries to fill the gaps where the strawberries aren't growing? Or do you want to be able to just graze and snack all summer long? Other kinds of strawberries you can grow include alpine strawberries, which I've never grown. And then, of course, there are the native strawberries, the tiny strawberries. We have woodland strawberry and just wild strawberry. So I have wild strawberry carpeting my food forest area in my garden, and they're beautiful and they make an excellent ground cover, like a living mulch. And my wine cap mushrooms love growing up amongst the wild strawberries, but I almost never get strawberries because they're not protected. And so all the birds and the other critters get those strawberries before me. Number 5, we are done with berries. I'm sorry for all the berries, but berries are delicious, so why wouldn't you love them? Number 5 is rhubarb. Rhubarb is another herbaceous perennial that is extremely hardy. It's really easy to grow, as with anything, as long as you give it the right conditions. Rhubarb is one that has a really quick turnaround. So if you buy a plant, not starting from seed, but you buy a plant from a nursery or get it from a friend, you can be harvesting from that the next year, as long as it's happy. Rhubarb does like nutritious soil, so if you're planting it, just make sure you amend that planting hole with compost or top dress it with compost, and make sure that it's in an area that gets lots of sunlight, and then they should grow huge for you. My rhubarb is gargantuan. The stalks and leaves can sometimes reach my height. Like it's it's mammoth. It's ridiculous. I've actually never seen rhubarb growing that big anywhere else except for where I have it planted. So it clearly loves where it is. Now, rhubarb, the only downside to me is that it's really only useful in desserts. I have seen recipes for rhubarb used in dinner-like meals, but I haven't tried them yet. I'm a little nervous too, honestly. And because it's primarily a dessert food and because they are very tart, very, very tart, you have to add a lot of sugar. So if you're avoiding sugar, maybe you can't really use rhubarb. Recipes will typically call for 4 cups of rhubarb and 6 cups of sugar. Like, you really have to sugar that stuff up. Now, the one way that I have been able to enjoy raw rhubarb, snacking on it fresh in the garden, is by forcing the rhubarb. And this is a cool method I first heard about a couple years ago, and I really enjoyed doing it sparingly to my plants. You cover the plant in late winter, as soon as you know where it is, essentially under the snow. You cover it with something opaque, like a bucket. There's also these fancy clay cloches that you can cover them with that have lids, but that they probably cost hundreds of dollars. So I just use a bucket. And then you leave that bucket over the rhubarb as it starts to grow, checking on it every week or two. And the lack of sunlight is going to force the rhubarb, that's why it's called forcing, to grow really tall before it opens leaves. So it's growing tall, trying to reach the sunlight. Then not only do you get these really long stalks with minimal leaf, they're also very, very tender and they are sweeter. They're really something special. It can be hard on a rhubarb plant to force it, so I recommend not doing it every year, especially not to the same plant. Just bounce around from plant to plant if you have multiple. But it is a really fun way to make your rhubarb just a little bit more palatable raw. When I was a kid, I would eat the rhubarb stalks from my parents' garden just raw without a second thought. I wouldn't even sprinkle them with sugar. I would just go around snacking on rhubarb stalks like sour candy. But now I need a little bit more sweetness to make it worth it to me. So yeah, I'll either make it into a dessert or I will just force those stalks, and then they are good enough to eat raw in the garden. And rhubarb is one of those things that will just live indefinitely because the roots divide and you can spread your patch out. It's a quick turnaround, as I mentioned, and it just gets better and better over time as long as it's happy and you keep the soil amended with some compost every now and then, because it does like a lot of nutrients. Rhubarb is typically something that you would harvest in spring. And one of the things I love about it is that it's like the first thing you see poking up out of the snow, the little gnarly leaves coming out. They look like brains. They're really cool. But if you have a happy patch, you can harvest all summer long. Number 6 is edible tubers. There's 2 plants that I love that I would have just mentioned separately, but because I love them both, I decided to put them into a category of edible tubers. And both of them are native plants. One of them you've probably heard of and the other maybe not. The first one is Jerusalem artichoke. This one is gaining popularity. More and more people have heard of it now. It's also called sunchoke. This is a native type of sunflower, and it grows like a weed. It is very easy to grow in cultivated spaces. In fact, I recommend if you're going to grow Jerusalem artichoke to grow it in a container of some kind. I use a cut-off barrel sunken into the ground, and that works well to keep it contained. Jerusalem artichokes are a tuber that's like potato-like, but not really. I'm not going to compare it to a potato. I have found that they taste best prepared in this way. This is a recipe from a cookbook called Plenty, and it is a delicious recipe, a delicious way to enjoy Jerusalem artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes also store really well, so they're a great like survival crop. You can harvest when they're at their prime, which is like early winter, late fall, or very early spring. And then you can store them in a root cellar. So you can put them in a bucket of moist sand or sawdust and store them over a winter or even over a summer that way. And the other edible tuber that I really love and wanted to mention is Apios americana. Its common names are American groundnut or hopness. This is a native plant that is beautiful, and it is actually featured in the Hobby Homesteads logo. If you look at the logo, you'll see the vines around the outside. That is the hopness plant, or Apios americana. They are a legume, a native legume, like a bean. And in fact, they do produce edible bean pods that taste good. They're just nowhere near as abundant as the tubers are. So I've tried the the bean pods and it's really fun. They don't produce much compared to like my green beans. So I'm going to keep growing my green beans. They also have beautiful pea-like flowers, but they grow in these clusters or plumes, and they remind me of wisteria, but smaller, and they climb. So I have them climbing up the outside of my deck railing so that it forms a bit of a screen in the summer, and I really love this plant. Now, the edible part is the tuber, and these are the weirdest looking strings of balls, and I harvested for the first time last year from my patch. They do take a few years to get established and to get nice sized tubers on them. They were delicious, fried up like chips. I tried cooking them in a couple ways. That was my favorite way. So I sliced them thinly and I put them in the air fryer. They are way more like a potato than Jerusalem artichokes are, but a little more starchy. Number 7 is fiddleheads. Fiddleheads are the immature fronds of a native fern called the ostrich fern. When I lived at my old place, before this place, about 50% of our yard was shaded. And I've always loved growing food. I've always just wanted to grow food all the time. And so I wasn't about to stop growing food, even given those limitations. And that is when I got into shade gardening and finding the kinds of food that grew well in shade. And fiddleheads or ostrich ferns are one of those things that I learned about. They are a delicacy, these little fiddleheads. You can forage them, but they also grow well in gardens. So you don't even have to leave your space. You can just get them at home. And you will see them in like specialty food markets in early spring, mid-spring, but they're very expensive. I find they can be a little bit tricky to get established in a space where they're not wildly occurring. Maybe it's because I'm always trying to force them into drier spaces, but once they get established, they will grow wild. My dad has a patch that is just a massive patch, probably like 30 square feet, that's thick with ostrich ferns. And anytime I want another plant, I can go and just dig one out of his space and you can't even see that it's been taken. So I'm trying to get a patch that is that prolific here, but it takes a few years, as with all perennials. Takes a few years to build up a nice resilient plant or nice resilient patch of plants in the case of ostrich ferns. So if you have a space that is shady or part shade and preferably has a bit of moisture in the soil, that's ideal. You can get a really good patch going there. If you have drier soil, it's definitely possible to grow them. You just have to water them a lot in their first year until they become established, and then they should do fine. Number 8 is Perennial Herbs, another giant basket of plants that I've forced into one listing in my top 10 list. I love herbs a lot, and I particularly love perennial herbs. These are great because they're super cheap to buy. You can get them even at the grocery store sometimes, or at garden centers, nurseries, whatever, or from gardening friends. They can easily get divisions from established plants. You can spend under $5 on a plant, and because it's perennial, it's just going to keep coming back year after year and getting bigger and better year after year. So it's a really good bang for your buck, especially because herbs are very expensive to buy from the grocery store, like for culinary use. So you can buy the plants for the same price as you can buy cuttings from the plant to use in your cooking, even though that plant is going to provide hundreds of those cuttings in the future. So definitely grow herbs if you're not already. Some of my favorites for using in the kitchen just shows my heritage being from a Western background. Oregano, thyme, sage, rosemary. These are the common ones in the kind of food that I grew up eating. And so those are great ones for culinary use. There's tons of herbs out there that you can grow that are perennial, even in our area. Things like tarragon, winter savory, summer savory. These things are woody herbs, so they're tough. And then for teas, there's a whole other gamut of herbs that I grow that are perennial. Mint and lemon balm are obvious ones. And actually one of my favorite perennial herbs is a native plant, and it hurts when you brush up against it, but I've come to really adore this plant. That is stinging nettle. Stinging nettle could be considered a green as well, like a leafy green. You can saute it down and eat it that way, but I love stinging nettle tea. So I actually propagate some now. Some came up in my yard as a weed and I propagate it, but I keep it in a space where the kids and I aren't likely to brush up against it. I mean, you'll be fine. It's just uncomfortable burning sensation when you rubbed against a stinging nettle plant that hasn't been cooked. So that for me falls into the perennial herb category when I'm talking about tea herbs. Now I have been working on a tea garden video for over a year now, just like the concept, but there's so much information that I want to give and so many images I want to capture in order to make this video that I just haven't done it yet. I'm probably taking it far too seriously, but stinging nettles is on that list as well as one of my favorite plants for the tea garden, but it doesn't matter the herb. You will always get an awesome bang for your buck planting perennial herbs. So just plant them all. Number 9 is Perennial Alliums. Now, I've said this before, but my family, we don't eat onions. Kim, my wife, can't digest them, and so I don't grow them. I don't grow bulbing onions in the garden, but I still sometimes like to have onion flavor in things. And so things like Egyptian walking onions work really, really well for me. It grows like a green onion, nice and tall, and then at the top it forms these little bulbils of baby onions, and then it bends over and it plants those in the soil. And then those grow up, and then they form more bulbils at the top, and they bend over and plant themselves in the soil. And so that's how it walks through your garden. So they spread wonderfully with no hands-on effort at all as a gardener, but they also don't take over. I have not had an issue at all with them becoming weedy or invasive. They've been a really great edible perennial for me in my food forest area. And what I love about them is that for someone like me who just wants a little bit of onion every now and then, they grow very reasonably sized small bulbs, kind of like a shallot. I don't know how you pronounce it. And you can peel them and chop them and have something like a white onion in your food from those. But also the stems are a replacement for green onions if you eat green onions. And they are one of the first things that come up in the garden in the spring. So they're really fun to have growing in your space like a wild plant. They just pop up, hands off, and then you've got early food from those. And another perennial allium that I will always grow, this could probably have gone in the herb category as well, but it's chives. I love chives. Chives are a classic on baked potato. I can't have a baked potato without chives, but also the flowers are edible. You can put them in salads, but ever since I saw Tanya from the Lovely Greens make a chive blossom infused vinegar many years ago now, I have made it every year since. I love the stuff. It's epic in salad dressings. And they're a beautiful perennial to have in the garden as well when they're in bloom, and just a versatile perennial allium. There's also perennial leeks, which I'm growing for the first time this year. I don't know how it's going to go, but I think they just sort of divide off of the base of each plant. And so you harvest these small leeks every year. I'm excited to do that. I start leeks from seed every January, and it's a bit labor intensive that I have to care for these little seedlings for so many months. So if I can get perennial leeks that satisfy my leek needs, that would be awesome. I could cut something out of my seed starting list every year. There are some native options as well for these perennial alliums. Probably the most common that we see in restaurants are ramps or wild leeks. And these are very forageable, but also it's easy to over harvest. And so you have to forage responsibly if you're going to get ramps. They take many years to grow to maturity and reproduce. And I have some growing in my garden. You can buy the plants and plant them in your garden, but it takes a long time. And so my one plant is still just one plant. And maybe by the time I am 80, I will be able to make a nice bowl of wild ramp and potato soup or something from my own patch. In the meantime, I'm lucky enough that my mom has them rampant through her forest. And so we can forage from there anytime we want in the spring. Also one of the earliest edibles to come up in nature in my area. There's also nodding wild onion, which is a native, but I have not tried to eat from mine yet. Number 10 is probably one that you have been waiting for in this list. You've been wondering, why hasn't she mentioned fruit trees yet? Again, another big bucket of a giant category that includes lots of possibilities, so I'm cheating here. But fruit trees, I have as number 10 and not as number 1 because they are definitely more hands-on than a lot of these other edible perennials, and they can be intimidating for people who are looking for a hands-off garden. You may not want to plant something that requires all this maintenance and potentially spraying and pruning, but I love my fruit trees. We have seven cultivated, like popular kinds of fruit tree. We have apples, we have plum, pear, peach, and Asian pear. And they have varying degrees of difficulty to them. Pruning was intimidating for me at first. I'm only 4 years into owning fruit trees and caring for them, but I read a couple books and I watched a couple YouTube videos, and now it really makes sense. Something clicked, and like pruning these trees doesn't seem like a big deal to me anymore. I go out in late February, early March, when there's not much else going on in the garden, and get to work snipping away, shaping the trees. And I actually really enjoy now the process of shaping them, getting them to be how I want them to grow for the coming growing season. Now, I would say that the type of fruit tree you grow should align with your climate. So grow something that does well where you live, because that'll make your life infinitely easier. I live in an area that's really good for apples. And so I have 3 apple trees, different varieties, and they are very easy to keep. So far, I've barely had a blemish on the trees. Pruning has been easy. Now, I may have lost one this winter because I failed to protect it from the rabbits, but we will see how that does. But they've been a lot easier to keep happy than, say, my peach tree, which, yes, it's a hardy variety, but generally peaches like it warmer than what we have here. And so they can be a little bit more finicky. My peach tree produces abundantly now, and early on, it's entering its 4th year, and last year we got a full bushel of perfect peaches off that tree, and the squirrels took probably half before we got to that point. So really prolific tree. It grew super fast, but it's really, really dramatic in all the ailments that it comes down with. It's got all the things that a tree can have that go wrong with it. It's not slowing it down. It just means I'm always worried about it and I'm always babying it. So yes, that tree takes a little bit more maintenance and hands-on activity as a gardener. Now, don't discount the native or the wild type fruit trees. It all depends on your purpose for a fruit tree, really. If you want to make ciders or just like press for fresh apple cider, not alcoholic, you can get crabapple trees that are pretty close to wild trees, and they're really, really resilient, and they produce abundantly, and you don't really have to worry about doing much to them. Pruning is minimal, and you can make great ciders and drinks from those crab apples. And they also tend to have beautiful blossoms in the spring. So those are just generally easier to care for. Mulberries grow like wild. In fact, they may be verging on invasive here, because we have a native variety of mulberry that's very hard to find anymore. And then the European mulberries have come over and sort of taken over, but they grow abundantly as well. They may seem difficult to harvest, but when we had a mulberry tree, I used the sheet trick where I just laid a sheet down under the tree and then shook the branches, and we filled a bucket with mulberries like that. It was awesome. So if you have mulberry or you're interested in mulberry, keep that harvesting trick in mind. And then pawpaws are another native fruit tree that has more classic type fruit. It's like a tropical tasting fruit. I've never tasted a pawpaw, despite multiple people in my immediate life having pawpaw trees that are producing fruit. I've just never tasted it. Every year in my town, the urban orchardist, my friend Matt, he hosts the Pawpaw Festival. It's been going on a couple of years now, but it's always over Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm never available to attend because we have family dinners and stuff going on. So I've missed out on that. But pawpaws are a really cool native tree, and apparently they grow like weeds as well, again, if they're happy. I know that my dad was overrun with pawpaw saplings, and he was ripping them out of the ground. He was selling them until he couldn't sell them anymore, and then he was giving them away. So it could be easy to grow. I do have 2 pawpaw trees, but they're only a year old. So it'll be a long time before we see fruit off of those. So that's all 10. But you can tell I cheated a lot in cramming 10 items into this list by making these big bucket categories. And even that's not enough. There are others that I feel like I want to mention, even though they did not make my top 10 list. So I have an honorable mentions list. 4 more things. One is nuts. There are a lot of different nuts that grow native to where I am. And some of the obvious ones are like black walnut and acorns. You see those everywhere. They're often just growing in parks and public spaces, and you can harvest from them there. I don't think it's worth it to me to grow those plants in my space because they get really, really large. In fact, I once received a free black walnut tree, or maybe it was an English walnut, from a company, but I can't put that tree in my yard. I've had a black walnut in my yard before at my old place, and that's why I struggled with about 50% shade canopy and couldn't grow my veggies. So I don't want that in my suburban space. My favorite nut that I do grow at this space is hazelnut. And while I haven't harvested for mine yet, because they're only going into their 3rd year here, I've had hazelnuts from my mom's bushes before that were awesome. Slightly smaller than cultivated hazelnuts, but just slightly, and taste exactly the same, only better because they're super fresh. Also, I am growing them as like a hedgerow in my garden as a way to be like a first stop for the birds and the squirrels before they get to my garden. So I'm growing them in a bit of a sacrificial way, which is partly why they're not on my top 10 list, but they are an honorable mention. Another honorable mention is sea kale. I have talked about this one before in other videos where I'm talking about my perennials. Sea kale is one of the first things to pop up in the spring, which is one of the things that I love about it. But it is a little bit bitter unless you get it right away, really early, and you eat the shoots before the leaves fully open. You can eat the leaves too when they're young, but really the young shoots are the best. They taste a bit like broccoli stems. So even though I don't necessarily like eating them after they've gotten too mature in like late spring and into the summer, then they're too bitter. They are great early spring when you don't have other things growing yet in the garden. A third honorable mention, similar to sea kale, this is an early green, and that is sorrel. There's actually 2 kinds of sorrel I want to mention here, even though they're completely unrelated. One is the French sorrel, which has a really lemony taste, and I have a French sorrel plant that I've barely nibbled at over the years because it's too lemony for most of the things I want to use it in, but I do use it sparingly in salads in early spring. Again, I don't have a lot of other things going on. And then the other kind of sorrel is a wood sorrel, and that is a totally different species. It is a native plant here that is just a weed. It pops up everywhere, and you can also eat wood sorrel like a green. The last honorable mention are fruiting vines. Fruit, berries, I know. I talked about berry bushes and shrubs. I talked about berries that grow in canes. I talked about strawberries. I talked about fruit trees. It's all about the fruit and berries. But I didn't mention the vining things, and that includes grapes. I have a grapevine, but I don't have the ideal trellis for it. So it doesn't produce as abundantly as it could. Grapes do take up a lot of space, and you need to have the proper trellising system, which you also need to have for things like raspberries. But you know, grapes are this whole new level, for me at least, of pruning. It's different from raspberries. It's different from fruit trees. It's its own kind of pruning and its own kind of trellising in order to get good yields. Now, I will say I think they're probably worth it if you have space for a trellis, because my mom, from 2 or 3 plants that were trellised correctly, would produce enough grape juice for us for an entire year, plus a lot of fresh eating. And even our 1 grape plant, we had a couple of liters of juice from last year. Another vining edible perennial would be the hardy kiwi. I don't have any yet. It's been on my wish list for many years, since before I moved here, because apparently they can tolerate partial shade, partial sun. And I had a shady spot, so I thought I would try it, but I never got around to it. And if you grow hardy kiwi, say in the comments how it tastes, how you like it, if you recommend I do try to get some, and what kind of support structures you have for your hardy kiwi. And then last on this little list of vining fruit is the boysenberry, which I mentioned I grow, and it's a hybrid between the loganberry, dewberry, raspberry, and blackberry. The boysenberry grows very vigorously, very vigorously. We have a 6-foot trellis for it now, and it grows up and then it grows over and vines all around itself. It self-propagates really easily. When a vine tip touches down the ground, it roots and it sends out a new plant. So it's a great one if you want sustainability in your garden. Resilience, you can just keep that plant growing and expanding, and you can sell the baby plants. So boysenberry is another one that is vining like that. When I look at this list, the common theme isn't novelty. It isn't even high yield. It's about playing the long game. Edible perennials require patience, but these plants will show up year after year. They get better and better year after year, and you form a relationship with the plants. You come to anticipate that next harvest. I would love to know what edible perennials you have growing in your space, or what edible perennials you have tasted, that you've tried, that someone else has been growing, or that you've found wild. I want to know, because one of the most interesting things about gardening content on YouTube is how things differ so much from locale to locale. Like, it's different where you are. Your perennials are going to be different from my perennials, and the things that do well in your spaces will be different from the things that do well in mine. And I'm really curious to know what your favorite edible perennials are and where you live. I've got lots more perennial content coming up, as well as more seed starting videos, and then just getting out in the garden and vlogging through the garden season. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll come and grow with us.